All right, welcome back to the Contrarians. We are back at it again with another Dark Horse album review panel for you. We're talking about Chinatown by Thin Lizzy today. So if you like the Contrarians, there are plenty of ways to support the channel. You can give a like, you can subscribe, you can join the conversation in the comments, and there's more ways to support the channel in the description below, like Patreon, etc., etc. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. We've got a fun album to talk about, and I want to thank all of you at home for watching. And let's end the intro stuff and get right into it. So, Chinatown is the 10th studio album by Thin Lizzy. It was released in 1980. It's often ranked low in Thin Lizzy's discography. There's lots of things that you'll probably hear about tonight. There's a roster change up. There's a solo album in the mix. There's following a very strong album, but again, it's often referred to as maybe a disappointing album, and we're going to find out if that's the case among Contrarians. We've got a great panel here today, so I'm going to get right into it, and I'm going to go right over to Davy. And Davy, let's hear your thoughts on Chinatown.
Thank you very much, Nick. Bit of an outlier, as you say, for numerous reasons, but I have never quite understood why it does have such a backlash against it, apart from perhaps the notion that it's a little bit of a retread of what's been done. It's a bit of a kind of safe album for them to make. There's quite a lot of themes and whatnot that have been revisited from previous albums, and there's a little bit of a lack of ambition in places. But I think with the lineup changes, with the failure to crack America, and actually UK sales even declining in the last few albums, maybe retreading your steps and seeing if you can recapture the magic of 3 years earlier, which seems like nothing now, but then must have been a lifetime. I don't think that's too much of an issue. What we do get with the 9 tracks, I think, is solid to very, very good in places. To go through them, We Will Be Strong is one of those great kind of party anthems that Thin Lizzy do so well. So yeah, We Will Be Strong is a very good kind of mission statement kind of track. This is who we are this time. We're coming out with aplomb. It's the gang is back together kind of thing, even though, as we know, it's not quite the same gang, the left is, and they're not in the same place mentally or personally either. Chinatown, great rocker, with it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a good time here. But it always reminds me of my buddy Rich, who loves Chinatown, the movie, the Jack Nicholson movie, and loves Thin Lizzy. He always quotes the last line of that film, "Forget about it, Jake," and then he says, "It's Chinatown," just like Phil does on this record. Chinatown. So yeah, that's a really good rocker. And then Sweetheart, again, but first 3 tracks, I don't think there's a footstep wrong in these first 3 tracks. Sweetheart, bit of a rocker, but then goes really poppy at the choruses, with the Sweetheart, with really poppy harmonies. And I think that's preferable to what they've been doing before, which was kind of alternating between really almost sappy stuff like Sarah and whatnot, just the earlier in the year. Earlier in the year, which I don't know. I don't think that's what people wanted from Thin Lizzy. So to be able to do a song like Sweetheart but still make it a bit punchy and a bit rocky and poppy at the same time, intensely poppy, I think is really cool. Sugar Blues, very much almost confessional about where the band in places were, especially Phil and Scott, of course. But a good bluesy track anyway. I mean, it's good for what it is, and it's not great lyricism, but it's kind of classic idea of using fruits and foods and whatnot as metaphor for some cases sex, in this case addiction. But it's it's what it is, and it's pretty good for that. Killer on the Loose, the last track on side 1, that gives us another one of those cool kind of party rockers that Thin Lizzy were really adept at putting out. It's a little more contemporary sounding. It almost sounds like what Status Quo were up to at this point, rather than Thin Lizzy. It loses a little bit of the the dual guitar aspect, because I don't think Snowy's interplay is anywhere near as good as what we've seen before when Gary Moore was in the band, or obviously when Robbo was in the band in the really classic era. But regardless, we are still getting great guitar playing throughout the album, from Scott and from Snowy. I just think that it shows that Snowy is a more structured session guy rather than someone who's used to playing off of somebody else. Having a Good Time is another kind of party rocker that Thin Lizzy are so adept at. So it's almost like they're just doubling down on what they know they can do well and what sells. Having a good time. The only distracting thing I think is that the way they all come in and sing the actual line, having a good time, just sounds so much like Queen. It just sounds exactly like, whenever they sing having a good time, I think, don't want to stop at all. Like, surely it must have occurred to them that sounds exactly like the same delivery. It's the same words and the same delivery. But hey, Freddie was friends with Phil, so maybe it was a kind of intentional, playful homage. Who knows? I think it's a really good track, a really fun track, and there is quite a lot of fun throughout this record, regardless of the kind of popular opinion that they got a bit dark in their latter period. Speaking of that, though, I can't say that about Genocide. You don't get too many upbeat tracks called Genocide. Killing of the Buffalo. The co-writer on it is what's his name? The guy who also does the album artwork for the band. I've lost it.
Jim Fitzpatrick, Davy.
Jim Fitzpatrick, that's right. Who also bizarrely did that iconic Che Guevara poster that every young socialist has on their walls. He was the Thin Lizzy album designer and the co-writer on Genocide. Although what he really did was apparently just kind of tell Phil the more historical aspects that he needed to include. It's a bit on the nose trying to write about the Native American plight and whatnot, and it just seems a little bit outside his wheelhouse. I'm not sure that's where Phil's strengths were. He could write from his perspective, but he's writing for a different continent there, and maybe it's part of the whole, we'll give it one last push to try and conquer America. We'll put on a track that reflects an Americana rather than an Emerald or whatnot, which is more homeward bound. But I don't think Genocide works musically or lyrically very well. I think that's the only one in the album I really don't care for, despite it being perfectly competent. I think there's too much talent involved for it to be incompetent at all. Didn't I think is absolutely gorgeous. Kind of out of place almost in this, because it's the only real beautiful kind of ballad that we get. There's nothing on here even remotely comparable. And I think it's rather telling that was the one track that was considered for Phil's solo record, because if you take that out of here, you would have pretty much a straight rock album with nothing slow on it really at all. It would all be bangers from start to finish. But Didn't I gives you a good change of pace. Phil sings really well on it, regardless of his voice now being a bit lower than it has been in previous years. Phil sings really well on it. I love the pacing of it, and it's yearning, it's painful, and even when the band come in, it doesn't feel too overblown. It doesn't feel like, okay, we've got the dual guitars, we've got keyboard in this lineup, we've got everybody come in. No, it never kind of goes over the top that way. I appreciate the restraint shown on that. I think it's really good. And Hey You is a solidly different spectacular closer. But I think it's a good way to go out. That is probably the track that has the most pyrotechnics when it comes to showing off the dexterity of what everybody and their granny who's involved in this project can do, because unlike previous records, this has got quite a few session players and sidemen and friends and cohorts, comrades joining in on events. Mid-year shows up for backing vocals and things, as we know. The kind of elephant in the room, as Nick set up, is that Phil not only was in a bad place personally, but professionally he's pulling in two directions, because this came out 6 months after the Solo and Soho debut album from him. So he's kind of making a Thin Lizzy album that sounds like a Thin Lizzy album intentionally. because he's now trying to do different things solo. I mean, this lineup also recorded for that album, for Solo and Soho. But I think this is an attempt to say, what's the Thin Lizzy classic sound again? Let's just do that. So I think that all it can really be accused of is a slight lack of ambition and maybe being a bit derivative of their own works from earlier, not pushing any new real boundaries at all. Parts of it sound very contemporary. I do miss a lot of the guitar interplay, which I just don't think Snowy's adept at, despite his skill, as I said. But overall, I mean, I like the production on it, although it's quite weird in places. But Kit Woven's credited alongside the band, but apparently all Kit really did was engineer, like he had done on previous records, and basically tell Phil that's the button you press if you want. Phil would kind of give the orders basically, and Kit Woven just kind of told him how to do it. So it wasn't a real production from Kit Woven. I know the band were frustrated because Phil was unprepared, and he was coming in and just making up lyrics on the spot in a lot of places, and that's why he's out of sync with the band. I think that shows sometimes. Killer on the Loose is probably the best example of that. He's really just making up what rhymes in his head, and I think that it does show that he's moving aside from the band. I'm not sure what would have happened had the long term continued. I know that he obviously had a couple more projects on the go after even his solo career, but I'm not sure how this lineup or anything this lineup would have kept going too long, with Phil being where he was in his personal life, because he's just pulling himself in too many different directions, and he's not in a good mental or physical place enough to do that. To be honest, he's not ready to be in that position. And as much as Killer on the Loose was the hit single from this, it got to number 10 in the UK. It was their biggest hit since The Boys Are Back in Town. I think that's the track where you can see. I mean, what's the first line of it? Like, if I ever stand in a general election, what? That's not a Phil Lynott lyric. That is the lyric of somebody just coming up with something off the top of their head because he's found a few things that rhyme with election on the spot. So yeah, I think Phil the Poet, which they doubled down on in the recent box set of Rock Legends, where you get a book of his poetry. I think that goes out the window here, and we have Phil the let's get the job done. We need an album. Let's just make a Thin Lizzy album that sounds exactly like a Thin Lizzy album. He's pragmatic. It's Phil the pragmatist rather than Phil the poet on this one. But again, nobody lets the side down. I think it's solid, if not peak. So although it's dark horse, I'm not going to say it's a 10 out of 10 by any stretch of the imagination, but it deserves to be higher in the catalogue than a lot of polls put it. So I'll give it a solid 8 for myself. 8 for Chinatown.
Good. Awesome. Thanks, Davy. All right, let's go over to Peter next. Peter, let's hear your review of Chinatown.
Hello. Thank you. Nice to see everybody. I look at this album maybe a little bit differently than some might. Its place in line really matters to me. And a lot of times this is viewed as kind of the outlier, like that's been used before. But I'm going to suggest that it was the album previous, Black Rose, that is the outlier. I'm not talking about quality or whether you like it or dislike it. I'm saying that was the bigger right turn from the string of albums that they had been doing since Fighting. To me, this album feels more like the follow-up to Bad Reputation, minus a couple of the bigger hits or maybe more classic type of songs. This feels and sounds just like it belongs right there. Black Rose is the one that takes us to the different direction. The addition of Gary Moore, the way it sounded, the way the tunes were written and played, made us have a certain expectation that said, oh, Thin Lizzy's changing. They've gone this direction now. And now all of a sudden, whoop, I pulled that out. We're going back over here. Gary's gone. And now we don't even have Robertson. And we have this new band and we have a fractured Phil. But to me, These are, and I don't want to use the word disparagingly, these are almost like if they were a bunch of extra session tracks from that era. They have the same feel. They have the same agenda, the modus operandi. It's Thin Lizzy. It's classic 70s Thin Lizzy. But it's not going to be a prominent standalone album. I think it suffers from a couple key things. The departure of Tony Visconti is important. I think the sound on this, while good at times, is highly inconsistent. The guitar tones, listen to the guitar tone on Chinatown, that's never revisited. That is never used again on any of the other tracks. And so they go from various degrees of heaviness, various degrees of distortion. The drums stay pretty consistent. I believe Phil's bass is a little recessed for my taste. I don't think there's nearly as much low end or punch in it that there were in the previous records, which impacts how these songs are delivered. The material is okay. And when the reason I didn't want to use disparaging is that they're still good songs. Side one, especially, you've got 5 great tracks in a row for me that I would have no problem listening to on a regular basis. And a good portion of side 2, I have no problem with either. It does tend to fall off a little bit and get a little bit weaker as it finishes out, in my opinion, but it's still a solid album. And the addition of Snowy White, and I don't understand at all any comments that he's the wrong guy or he's didn't fit in or anything. He is a perfect complementary player. And to me, the problems I had moving forward with Thin Lizzy is the addition later on with Sykes. Sykes doesn't play well with others. He's a solo guy who it's about him. And Snowy fits right where he's supposed to. He plays what he needs to, and the band still sounds tight. And the live recordings from this era, of which there are an abundant amount, sound great. And he sounds solid on the older material. So I never had an issue with that. It really, if you take a look at these tracks, and if any of these were added as just an extra track over those, let's say those 3 records of Johnny, Jailbreak, and Bad Reputation, just take them and split them up and add 2 to one, add 3 to another one. You'd be okay. They'd fit in all right. Also, the problem here from a popularity standpoint is 1980, as we all know, is absolutely loaded with some of the most seminal hard rock albums from other bands. And it's really easy for this to just absolutely get buried amongst all of those that are way, way more popular and way more talked about. I think this band found its legs with this next record, and I really enjoy Renegade. And I think they found their cohesion and they found what works for that lineup. And again, that's the natural follow-up. And then, of course, Thunder and Lightning is his own thing. So I don't have an issue with this album. I do like other ones better. I prefer those. But I'm going to give it a good solid 7 out of 10. And it's a good listen for me. And Chinatown, the track itself, just needs to get the praise because it's just one of the best tracks they've ever done, in my opinion. So I like the album and I listen to it often. So 7 out of 10 for me.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter. All right. So, fun fact for you at home: if you go on the Wikipedia page for this album, our very own Martin Popoff is quoted in that Wikipedia page. So let's see. Let's get your updated review of Chinatown.
All right. So yeah, I have no problem with this album. I've always liked this album. And one point I want to make is that when I compare this record to the previous records, like I love Black Rose as well. I just think this band got better during this trilogy of albums. It's not really a trilogy, but Black Rose, Chinatown, Renegade. You all know my thoughts on Renegade. It's my favorite Thin Lizzy album. Love it to death. Love the production. Love the seriousness. Just the regal pageantry of that record. And yeah, I'm not a big Thunder and Lightning guy either. But the interesting thing about this record versus the previous, go back to, forget anything pre-fighting. But I mean, even fighting forward all the way through Bad Reputation, there's enough songs on each one of those. There's got to be at least 2 songs on each one of those that I like less than any song on this record. So that damns them a little bit, although it's got a lot of songs I like more, kind of thing. I agree with a lot of what you said, Peter, and a lot of what you said, Davy. Very eloquently put, Davy, about the idea of this just feels like a record that didn't need to happen. It feels like a little bit forced. I agree on Genocide, although Genocide musically is probably my favorite song on the whole album. I love We Will Be Strong. I love Chinatown. I think Hey You is a little bit of a drop off. I kind of disagree in that it feels a little bit like the chords are too blocky and simple. There's something very meat and potatoes about this album. It's got an evenness that almost like leans into fatigue versus the previous album just felt a lot more actionable, like a lot of action events, a lot of really flashy, interesting things, a lot of variety. This doesn't have a lot of variety, as you guys have mentioned in tone. It's pretty much one volume throughout, except for Didn't I? And then Renegade, I think, is just this hallowed, heavenly sort of, puffy, gorgeously recorded, introspective, everything about that album is just way more passionate sort of thing. And I agree the production is a little bit noisy and blocky and mid-rangey, feels a little lacking in it. But yeah, love it to death. I think Brian's drumming is amazing on it. Like I say, I love We Will Be Strong for one of those types of songs. I love what you said, Peter, how you could just take these songs and pop them into place. And you said it in a positive way. And Davey, you said it in a bit of a negative way, which is the exact, both points are valid in that they've already covered all of these little terrains. They're ticking off a bunch of little boxes that you could line it up with another one previously. But the thing is that makes it lesser and it causes it to be a less critically acclaimed album. But, had, for example, a We Will Be Strong, come before a Do Anything You Want To, I might like it more, right? I might have liked it more, or a Killer on the Loose Before I Get Out of Here. Had it come first, might have liked it more, right? So yeah, it's kind of interesting in that way. I don't know what else to say about it. Interesting drum sounds, interesting snare tom sounds on it. Very, his usual Featherlight sort of touch. I think he's a little flashier on this album than he is on anything before Black Rose, and probably even Black Rose included. I think he's got a real sort of fluid motion across these songs. Chinatown and Genocide are both very, very fluid heavy metal type songs. So yeah, great album. I'm going to give it an 8. And one last point I'll make is that for the same reason I rated Perfect Strangers my favorite Deep Purple album, I'm rating this really highly because of the math. Like I say, the math on this one, it's even, but it's super consistent. And I can't say I feel the same consistency about Johnny the Fox, Fighting, Jailbreak, or Bad Reputation. So there you go. I'm going to give it an 8.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Martin. Let's keep it rolling, and let's go over to David next. So David, your review of Chinatown.
Hi, thanks for that, Nick. So to start things off, right, this is another one of those that I'm doing that's a fool's journey. I've been a Thin Lizzy fan for about 5 weeks now. Thank you, Peter, for that conversation. But now I am a person who actually can buy a T-shirt and feel like I'm legitimately like part of the group. So I'll say this: I have never gotten into a band before that has 12 albums that I automatically take to and automatically think are worth owning. Just for context, even the bottom third, the bottom 4 albums that I would rank on this, I still would be excited about and I still would buy and still like Thin Lizzy. So there's a lot to love here, and I've never gotten into a band like this before. So it makes me, I'm happy we're all here to talk about this, but like, besides it being the 10th album and in the timeline having so much great that came before it, and kind of like putting that up against this one as a contrast, I'm kind of always, I'm wondering, not always, but for the past 5 weeks, I'm wondering, why is this one considered such a disappointment? Is it just because it had so much competition from before? Now, what I like about this album and why I really put this one up high for me is like down to the cover, this album is just like obscure and kind of weird and lurid. And that's what I love about it. I mean, it's not as weird as like Kiss the Elder, but it's beyond what I knew about them as a band, because all I've known in America is The Boys Are Back in Town and Jailbreak. It's just these bar rockers. And then another thing is like, this is 1980 and this album is as heavy as like Judas Priest, British Steel. It might even be heavier in my opinion. It's 8 of the 9 tracks, even the pop song has teeth. And I really, really, really appreciate that about this album quite a bit. Another thing about it is that besides the first 10 seconds or so of Hey You, which sound kind of policey, there's nothing about this album that sounds new wavy from that time. So I second to what has been second, third, fourth, like what a lot of everybody said prior, that this is sort of like them relying on what they did great before and what they're sort of like known for the best. These just like these hard rockers. One thing I noticed about here, and I forgot the dude's name, but there's a new keyboardist that's in sort of like ancillary to the group, Darren Wharton. And I read that he's like a teenager. He's like a teenage whiz kid. The keyboards sound like they're a bit buried in here. And there are times when I thought it could have like flourished a bit. Like I hear them in the background of Sweetheart and Having a Good Time, but they just sort of sound like these wobbly, like laser beam type things, sort of like at the beginning of Judas Priest Invader or Fox on the Run by Sweet. They're just like that's sort of going on in the background. And I kind of just would wish, like, especially on Sweetheart, if they just went off and did like a detour and did like the synth solo, kind of like Styx or Uriah Heep would do, I would be a little bit better. But I'm not really necessarily like wishing that would happen. And that song, for instance, the pop song Having a Good Time, this one's interesting because it's like so dichotomous. On one hand, it sounds like it comes off Cornerstone by Styx. I'm thinking specifically like the Tommy song, Never Say Never, because it has that power guitar and it's juxtaposed next to like the acoustic, like rhythm section. And it reminds me of like Styx at that time, or even like what Bachman Turner Overdrive was doing in a couple songs on the Freeways album. It's got that like pop element. And it also starts with that bam, like right at the beginning, just like the Never Say Never song. It actually reminded me of Journey, Be Good to Yourself before all the keyboards start, because it just starts off so powerfully. But then juxtaposed to that, it has this like very mid-70s Rolling Stones element about how loose it is. I love when Phil Lynott just calls out both guitarists before they're about to do a solo and does that little break the fourth wall moment. Again, this like reminds me of just how weird the album is, where you can tell that they're on drugs. You can tell that they're kind of like breaking apart at the fray. And that's why they allow a lot of these strange elements to sort of like involve themselves in the production, when I guess if there was more quality control, these fun little moments wouldn't be happening. But that's kind of like what rock and roll is about, having that looseness. Another thing that's Stonesy is the Sugar Blues song, which is about white powder, and it's not exactly an anti-drug song either. So I had seen an interview with Phil Lynott around this time when he's basically talking about like, yeah, I've done heroin, but I never did it I never did it enough to where I was going to get really addicted to it, and it's a lot of fun. And it's just like that would never get said post like the 1982, 1981 by like anybody. It just seemed like by that time, like rehabs were just popping up like zits on a teenager. So it definitely seems of its time in that sense. Another thing that's like lurid about it is that there's this tension and that danger behind Thin Lizzy that I seem to gravitate towards. I know that Chinatown, Killer on the Loose, and Genocide, Killing of the Buffalo all have this like hostility and tension. This like thing. It sounds like the most eventful scenes at the end of a movie that's sort of like this You're going after the killer. You're doing that like cop chase that's trying to get the bad guy, French Connection style or something like that. And why the heck is there a song about buffalo on this? That's what I want to know. This is another weird thing. Like they put a song about buffaloes on this, and it's kind of like, did the plight of the whales get solved already? So now they've moved on to the buffaloes at this point. I love the fact that that song exists, though. I poke around fun with it, but it's kind of like when you listen to Phil Lynott sing this stuff, it feels like it still has this danger, this is what's so weird about it. Like he made a song about buffalo still sound dangerous, where it's like, the people around here are not kind to people going against buffaloes. It feels like he's got a switchblade on me, and I'm like, look, I wasn't going to do anything. I was just going to pet it. And I've been a vegan for a few years, and I'm not gonna have any problems with the buffaloes. Like I don't want any trouble. Like, I love that part of it. I know we have the strength to carry on. We will be strong. Is that chorus in the beginning, and it almost feels again like they're breaking the fourth wall, and Phil's singing that to himself to sort of declare it so he can believe it, to sort of continue the way that this band's going, because I know that it was kind of harsh times at this point. So if I can look that off to the side and it just looks like this strange snapshot of what a 70s band sort of like going off the rails a bit in 1980, and we know what happened afterwards where they did go off the rails, it's very interesting. If I was going to think about a rap album, if I'm going to go like really abstract here, this reminds me of like Tupac's Machiavelli album, where like you're predicting that you're going to die. And it's so strange to see that encapsulated inside of an album and go back to it. So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave it. As per like the original concept of the Contrarians, it's kind of like the one that I think is the one I favor the most. I think I put this one at the top. It does everything for me. The slower song, what's it called? Didn't I? That one's like okay. It's still a good song. I don't need to skip it at all. There's teeth all over this album. If you haven't gotten to Thin Lizzy, you like Boys Are Back in Town and Jailbreak, this has all of that teeth going on. And I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Nice. Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. That was great. All right, let's go over to Kevin next. Kevin, your review of Chinatown.
All right. This was an interesting one for me. I'm pretty familiar with the Thin Lizzy catalog, but I never spent a lot of time with Chinatown for whatever reason. So I went back and listened to the whole catalog again this week. It's a really interesting catalog. They probably have 4 or 5 favorite albums for me, depending on the day. This one was never really near the top, but it does have some strong points. I think I'll just jump right into the songs. We Will Be Strong, great opening rocker, nice guitar solo. I really like that. It's interesting to hear Scott Gorham talk about this period of the band for him, because he doesn't seem to have a fond memory of this album, but I think his playing is pretty good on the album. Chinatown, the next one, to me, that's the best song on the record, bar none. Almost has like a southern rock kind of riff to it in the beginning, and the trading solos at the end are just great. That's as good as any Thin Lizzy hard rocker in the whole catalog. Sweetheart, good pop rocker. The chorus for me, I have some issues with. It's like the word sweetheart, when they're singing it out, it kind of drowns out the last part of what Phil is trying to sing there. It's just kind of muddy. But it's a solid song. Sugar Blues, I like that song. Another good rocker, maybe a slightly more up tempo, but fits in nicely. And I like the main riff in that one. Killer on the Loose, another hard driving song, but very catchy. It's interesting if you look at the last live album. Is it Life Live? Is that what it's called? That's the only song from this album on there, and it's a great song. The whole first side, I think Peter said it earlier, I really don't have any issues with. It's a great first side. Having a Good Time, that is probably my least favorite song on the record. I think it just seems kind of lazy and weird, stupid lyrics by Phil. I think Davy said it earlier. He was making up lyrics on the spot at points, and this definitely sounds like that. And calling out the other members of the band, hey, Scott, play a solo, and here's Brian, give me some beats. It's kind of lazy to me. But then Genocide comes back. That's another good dark rocker. Little repetition in the lyrics and in the chorus there, especially towards the end of the song, it just kind of drags on. But all in all, a solid song. Didn't I? The only ballad. Little keyboard heavy. I think you really start to see Phil struggling with the vocals here. He's almost speaking the words, not singing them. And it's okay as far as Thin Lizzy ballads. I always liked on other albums when they would have a hard rocker and then a ballad, that nice variety in the songs. This is the only chance we get that on the album. I do like the dual guitar parts, and especially at the end where it starts to climb. I think that's really nice. And then it ends with Hey You, another nice, strong rocker. Closer, it's probably got the most variety of any songs on the album. Especially there's like a nice jammy mid or up tempo part in the middle of the song that kind of carries you through the song. I think the problems I have with this album is obviously Phil's vocals. You can definitely start to see the wear and tear of the years of partying on him at this point. He frankly sounds tired to me during the album. I know we've talked about the consistency of the songs on this album, and I think that's all correct, but I think I enjoy the variety of songs on some of the other albums, especially when they stack up. Like on Fighting, you might Suicide into Wild One, or the follow-up album, Renegade, they go from Angel of Death into Renegade. That's a nice contrast there. We don't really get that a lot with this album. And lyrically, there's a few points where Phil is not the poet that we know he can be. And then the production, it can be a little muddy. There's not a lot of low end. I think all in all, it's a solid album, but it feels a little undercooked. Like they needed a little more time. Maybe they didn't need to put out this album right away. It does seem like they were in and out of the studio a lot during this, so it was kind of chopped up. And they just felt like they had to release something at some point. But all in all, it's still a Thin Lizzy album. There's a lot to like here, and I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10.
Nice. Well put.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. All right, let's go over to John Music Nut next. Your review of Chinatown.
Okay, thanks so much for having me on. Just before we start, I talk about Chinatown. Let's give a little plug to the band that came out of Thin Lizzy, and that's Black Star Riders. This is their new album that came out last month, The Other Side of Paradise. I'm sorry, The Wrong Side of Paradise. This is a very good listen. It has that same spirit of Thin Lizzy. Definitely check out Black Star Riders if you haven't already. This is their 5th album, and all their albums are very solid. Now, Chinatown, to me, I echo a lot of the sentiments that all of us have said here. There is a very strong first half, and the second half, it's kind of hit and miss. As far as Phil's vocals, yes, I think he was losing the soul in his voice at this point. Now he was just getting deeper, but his voice wasn't as soulful, and I think that really affected some of the songs here. As far as the production goes, where I find, again, consistency is on the drums. Now, Brian Downey, who is a machine, this may be his finest drumming on a Thin Lizzy album, but at times, the drums sound almost like a drum machine the way they're recorded. They're just very, almost tinny at times. But when he does those great fills, you hear him bring a lot to the songs. But sometimes, like on a song like Killer on the Looses, the drums are it almost sounds like a drum machine, even though that song is fantastic. Now, as far as the songs go, We Will Be Strong is a very solid opener, but I think if you compare it to some of the other openers, that they've had on other albums, like Jailbreak, like Johnny, like Do What You Want To. I think it doesn't hold up quite as strong, although it is solid. Chinatown, different story. It's a killer. It sounds like the more cerebral brother to Bad Reputation. I love the drumming behind the guitar solos and the outro. I mean, it's fantastic. Phil's lyric on here, it's short, but it's menacing. It's a wonderful track. Perhaps my favorite on the album. Sweetheart, those unison guitar lines sound excellent. I think Snowy White's playing on here is very good. I just don't think, and this has been echoed on in some of our comments, he didn't have a distinct sound like Gary Moore did or Brian Robertson did. Excellent player, but not quite as distinct. Sugar Blues, one of the songs that Phil would write that would be prophetic. Cool bass line on here. Very creative lyric. It's a very good track. Killer on the Loose would interestingly be their last top 10 hit in the UK, because at the time this was released, you had the Yorkshire Ripper getting arrested and later being convicted for murdering 13 people in the UK, Peter Sutcliffe. And he got pulled over for driving with a fake license plate. And then later on, they wound up convicting him of all of these murders, and he wound up going to prison for life. But despite what that was going on, it should have been a big hit because it's a very catchy track. Now, from here, you have Having a Good Time. I think this is the weakest song in the Thin Lizzy catalog. I think compared to the wonderful lyrics, creative lyrics that Phil had written before, I think this is just corny. And I think that it just comes off nostalgic. And it sounds, I mean, maybe it is prophetic. Maybe he knew his life wasn't going to be long. But for someone who was 30, 31 years old when he wrote this song, I think it comes off very lame compared to what he did before. And that even includes the early albums where they were trying to find their sound, because at least those were interesting. And I mean, it's very well played. They're excellent musicians. But I think the song just comes up flat. Killing at a Buffalo, Genocide, is the song. I wasn't a big fan of this song, but revisiting this album this week, I've gained more love for this song. I think it's a very good song. It is menacing. I don't think it's as strong as anything on the first half, but I think it's a very good song. Now, Phil did the ballad so well, and I think the fact that his voice wasn't as strong at this point, along with the keyboards and the strings, I don't think it holds up to past ballads that he did, like Dear Heart and Sweet Marie and Fight or Fall or My Sarah. I think those songs, they're tearjerkers. But this, I think, comes off a bit schmaltzy. I mean, it's good. It's just that they've done better. Hey You, it's okay. I mean, they usually close albums out really strong. And this one, it doesn't really leave a strong impression on you. First half of the album, though, I think is very, very good. It's not one of my it's not one of my favorite albums by them. I think the 7 albums they did before this, starting with Vagabonds to Western World, right through Black Rose, I'm talking studio albums now, I think they're very good to fantastic. This one, there are some very good songs, but I think there's a lot of stuff that they've done better in the past. I would give this a 6.5.
Nice.
Thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, sorry, guys. All right. Last but not least, let's go to Butch. We'll get your review of Chinatown, and then we'll have the average score. But we'll pass it to you for now.
Greetings, gentlemen. First of all, I apologize for being a few minutes late. I had some connectivity issues, and in addition to a couple of dogs in the kitchen that wanted to be fed, and if I didn't feed them then, they would have been howling all through this, so I wouldn't have got. So anyway, it's hard for me to be objective at this point in my life about Thin Lizzy. They were a band that they were not, when I was in high school, when I was first getting into hard rock, this was a band that I liked. Like, I loved The Boys Are Back in Town, but I didn't know much about them until I finally picked up Jailbreak, because I bought a hit parader that had it was one of their, here's a list of the top 100 heavy metal albums of all time. And I think I bought the issue because actually Angel, who was a band that I was getting into, was listed in it. So Jailbreak was one of them. And when I read the paragraph about it, I was intrigued by it. So especially they brought up Emerald, and so I bought that one and then fell in love with that record. So then over the years, it became a matter of, grabbing the records here and there. Like I found Black Rose early on, and a couple of the other ones. I always liked Thin Lizzy a lot. As soon as I heard Jailbreak, and Emerald was immediately one of my favorite songs when I heard it, and it still is. But over the years, the repeated playing, the band has grown on me and grown on me and grown on me to the point where, if you'd have asked me 30 years ago who my Desert Island band was, I would have told you right away it was Kiss, and that was it. I couldn't live without those records. I'm telling you now, the only band I could really think of that if you put me on an island and told me that I couldn't have their catalog, that it would destroy me, it would be Thin Lizzy. Their music has become that important to me. I listen to it constantly. So, and I love all the records. It's hard for me to give them, sometimes to be truly objective about it, just because I like everything they've done. That being said, aside from the first 4 records, this is the first time, starting with Fighting. I feel like the stretch from Fighting through Black Rose, those are all 9 and 10 star records. Fighting's probably a 9 for me, and the rest are 10s up until maybe a 9.5 for Black Rose, because S&M I think is a little bit wonky lyrically. But this is the first time I feel like in that stretch where Thin Lizzy stepped down again. And they didn't step down far, but it was it's a little bit of a drop for me from Black Rose. I love We Will Be Strong. Chinatown's a great hard rocker. I always like that song. Sweetheart's cool. The chorus is a little bit, has been said, it feels a little bit, I don't know, done on the spot, kind of lazy. We need a chorus here. Let's just repeat this a few times. It's cool though. Sugar Blues is good. Killer on the Loose is good. Killer on the Loose, I think, misses it's interesting that song was as big a hit as it was, and it doesn't have it's one of the ones that doesn't have their trademark double lead harmony guitars on it. So it's an interesting standout in their catalog. I love Having a Good Time personally. I don't know what it is. There's just something about it. I love the rhythm of the verse, and the way that he sets the vocal line in there. The lyrics are what they are. I listen to a lot of lung-headed rock, so the lyrics don't really bother me. Yeah, it's not Phil being a poet, and as has been said a couple times here, Phil was in the studio a lot of times doing the lyrics on the spot. So it is what it is. I think the song is fun. I don't know, it's just one of those ones that has always strangely appealed to me. In some ways I feel like I shouldn't like it as much as I do, because I don't know, part of it feels like it should be filler to me, but it's not. I don't know. I love that song. Genocide is cool. It's kind of but it's Genocide's the Emerald / Massacre type song, but a step down from that for me. It's not as on the same epic scale, but it's good. But it kind of fills that role that Black Rose would have filled, or Emerald would have filled, or Massacre, that big historical kind of kind of thing. It's a cool song though. Did Nice okay. I mean, I like for schmaltzy ballads from Phil, I'll take Sarah any day over Didn't I? But I mean, it's fine. Hey You is cool. But again, not one of my favorites. Like I'm different from Martin. Like Martin said, he could find songs on here that he likes better than several on, each of those records from Fighting up through. I don't know if as much as I like this record in a lot of ways, if I were putting a compilation together myself for this and I had 45 to 60 minutes to do it, or, if we're taking up a full CD, 80, man, I think I might squeak one or two in, like, because I feel obligated to have something from Chinatown. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like the record. It just means that I like other material so much more than this. The production sounds a little bit like where the 80s was starting to head at the time. Like I don't even know. I'm just the singer. So there's something about the production. It's a little bit too, I don't know. It's a little bit clean for me. I think like it's a little bit bright or something. It doesn't have the same vibe as the records before. Maybe it was because they didn't have Tony like doing the record or whatever. As far as Phil's vocals go, I don't really notice a huge drop off, but then again, he was in the studio doing two records at one time, pretty much. He was doing Solo in Soho, and this one, which is a side note, like really irritated Snowy White, because he never knew he'd come into the studio to do sessions for Chinatown, would be scheduled, and he'd roll into the studio and they'd be like working on Solo and Soho stuff. But I guess, Phil would sing until forever at the mic. Like he just keep going and going. And I was reading some of the research I did, Kit said he had to, Phil finally got an understanding where Kit would say, say something to him and Phil would be, oh yeah, it's time for me to take a break. So I think Phil it feels to me like, I mean, you're doing two records at one time. Like I think he was pushing himself too much. I think maybe that's why this record suffers from, maybe Phil's intentions, like to get that solo record done, like, and he was funneling the songs that he felt like he couldn't use for Thin Lizzy, which is interesting to me because it never seemed to stop him in the past. Jailbreak is full of songs that people that don't know Thin Lizzy would never think a song like Romeo and the Lonely Girl or Running Back would be great Thin Lizzy songs, but they are. I mean, they're kind of like, or Fight or Fall. Like these are all kind of things that make those albums diverse. That I think was one of the things that appeals so much about the band. But I think what ends up happening is he funnels like this stuff that is, maybe less rock and more soulful or pop over to his solo record, and then ends up with whatever the rockers are left and has to put something out. And so I don't know. I don't think it's ever a good idea to do too much at one time and maybe bit off more than he could chew. That being said, I still think it's a strong record. I mean, for me to, when I say it's a step down, I mean, this is like an 8 out of 10 for me. I can listen to it straight through. I love like I said, I love Thin Lizzy. I love this record. It's just that I just don't love it as much as Jailbreak, Fighting, or, all those records that are like I'm on any given day could swap the number one spot for me. I do think like as good as Snowy White is, I mean, he did, his guitar work on here is good. He's great on, Renegade is a great record. I love Renegade. I think that's a step up from this one. He did come into the band telling those guys, I'm not a hard rocker like Gary or Brian. And I think some of that does come across. I mean, there's a little bit of that lost, but the playing is great on here. You can't, I can't really complain about it. So yeah, I mean, it's a shame too that they didn't tour the US after Black Rose. I mean, Gary Moore pretty much, I could kind of understand why he did it. Scott and Phil were out of control with drugs. But him sticking them on the Black Rose tour, causing them to have issues, where they just never toured here again. So who knows what would have happened to the band's success. I mean, they started like really just fading in America by this point, which is a shame. I think the album deserves more recognition than it gets for that part, that reason. So anyway, 8 out of 10 on this.
Nice.
And definitely worth having. I mean, I like this better than the first 4. Like I said, it's really good. It just, I don't know.
Right.
That's good. I love this record store edition of it. I was lucky to be able to get it. Like, it's beautiful. So it's got the second record is all demos. There's a track on here called Turn Around, Don't Play Around. That was a B-side. So worth looking into if you could find it. The double CD too has a whole disc of extra stuff on it, which is fabu. So
that should be on the album. The B-side.
Yeah, it's a great song.
The B-side of Killers on the List should be on the album. It's brilliant.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Butch, and thanks to all of our panelists. So we have an average score of about 7.5. So it's definitely a good album. The Contrarians give it a passing grade for sure, and I think it's one of those ones that you're going to have to go and listen to at home and let us know what you think in the comments. We need more discussion on this, I think, and the second discussion in the comments is always as good as the first one here. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to all of our panelists, Davy, Peter, Kevin, David, Martin, John, and Butch. Thanks again. And if you like the channel, if you want to help it grow, you can give subscribe, you can give a like. There's ways to support in the channel, but best thing you can do is just share it with a friend who also might be interested. And whether it's morning, day, or night, have a good one. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, gentlemen.
Yeah, see ya.